Today I'm starting a new experiment with vanilla beans. The basic premise is that I'm going to add equal parts of vanilla to 4 different jars, and then I'm going to add 4 different liquors to see which one makes the best vanilla extract in the end. Now to start, I have 2 vanilla beans, and cut them in half and then split them down the center to expose the black paste inside to have the most contact with the alcohol. I found that after trying to shove them in the jars, I need to cut the beans actually into quarters to fit, and to each of the jars I'm going to add about 100 milliliters of liquor. So the first one is going to be vodka, then rum, using 2 nibs that were about 50 mils each, then 100 milliliters of my favorite whiskey, and lastly bourbon, which I got 2 50 ml nibs. Then I looked them all over to make sure the liquid levels were about the same, and I needed to top up the vodka one slightly before sealing them up and placing them in my basement to age out. So it's been about 2 months since I started this experiment with the homemade vanilla extract. So I want to test how each of these compare to a store-bought brand that I got at the store and test them in 3 different recipes. So that will include granola, chocolate chip cookies, and adding them to a beer. Now, let's get testing. For the granola recipe, it's as follows. I'm going to mix up 2.5 cups of oats and 1/2 cup of chopped cashews with the second bowl on top of it so the nuts and oats are more evenly mixed. For the fat and sweetness in this recipe, I typically follow the ratio of 1 cup of oats is 1 tablespoon of coconut oil, 1 tablespoon of maple syrup, and 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. So first I'm going to add the coconut oil to a nonstick pan over medium heat, and once the coconut completely liquefies, it's time to add in the sweetness. Then I'm going to add in maple syrup, followed by the brown sugar, and mix it constantly as it's heated. Once it starts to bubble vigorously, I'll wait until the sugar is completely dissolved into the actual fat, and I'm going to pour that directly over the oats while hot. I'll mix it up again with my spatula to coat all the oats evenly. And now for this experiment, I'm going to divide it up into 5 equal portions, which should equal about 1/2 cup of each, and I'll add about 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract to each of them. Starting from left to right on the screen, I'll add vanilla extract made with the vodka, then the rum, followed by the whiskey, and lastly the bourbon, and those are for the homemade versions, and lastly the control I have is the store-bought brand, giving each of them a mix to ensure the vanilla is evenly mixed throughout. Now before baking them, I'm going to write on a piece of parchment paper to keep track and lay them out over the baking sheets, starting with the store brand. I'll cook each of them at the same time at about 250 degrees until they're golden brown, trying to use that low and slow method. Because this specific case took me about an hour and a half to achieve the nice golden brown oats that I was looking for, but I did come in about every 30 minutes to check on them and give them a mix before placing them back in the oven to ensure uniform cooking. Now after baking, this is what they all look like. They're nice golden brown, have fairly even coloring, and let's move on to the taste test. Starting with the control of the store-bought and comparing to the rest, I personally found that the vanilla in this one increased the overall perceived sweetness in their granola. I found that the rum and the vodka version tasted nearly identical, but they almost had an opposite effect compared to the store-bought brand, which actually decreased the sweetness of the granola. Since the bourbon and whiskey are made in similar ways and have a similar tasting profile, they both seem to add a boozy character to the granola as well enhance the nuttiness in the granola instead of the sweetness. So what does that mean? I think in this case, the store-bought brand definitely wins, but from what I've read online, vanilla extract can take up to a year to reach its full maturity, so maybe I'll try this again in a couple months' time. Next up is a classic chocolate chip cookie. The first step in that recipe is to cream the sugar with the butter. So into a bowl, I'm going to add 1 stick of room temperature butter, followed by 85 grams of white sugar and 180 grams of brown sugar. Then I'm going to use a fork and a little bit of time, and I'm going to cream these together, and eventually I'm going to switch over to a hand mixer. After creaming them together, my sous chef came in to observe my work. After a quick quality check on the egg, I cracked that 1 egg into the wet ingredients. Then I mixed it again with a fork to homogenize everything, and this is the resulting shiny batter. Now I'm going to divide this up into 5 equal portions to test each of the vanilla extracts. So after tearing it on a scale, I'll place them in separate containers, and as each of them I'll add 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. I don't want to bore you by showing you how I made all the different batches because they're all being made the same, but for the dry ingredients, I'll just show you it once. So I'm going to add 60 grams of all-purpose flour that was combined off camera with 2 grams of baking powder to the wet. I'm going to add that about 1/3 of a time, mixing in between to ensure there's no dry patches, and continue to all the dry is added. Then I'm going to add in the chocolate chip cookies and do my best to evenly spread them throughout the dough. Now, I've seen a lot of people say online that refrigerating cookie dough gives you the best chocolate chip cookies, so I'm going to try that in this specific recipe. So after flattening it down and sealing it up, I'll place it in the fridge for a couple hours. Off camera, I repeated the same process for the rest of the 4 cookie doughs. After a couple hours in the fridge, I preheated the oven to 375 and laid out the cookie dough onto the baking sheets. And I did notice by placing them in the fridge, they did dry out a little bit, and so maybe to compensate for that in the future, increasing the fat content would help with this. But regardless, I was able to make 2 cookies of each of the different vanilla extracts, and I'll label them again so I can know which one's different for the taste test. After about 15 minutes in the oven, the edges started turning golden brown, and the middles of the cookies were still a little gooey, which is the way I like my chocolate chip cookies. I let them cool on the baking sheet for a second, and then put them on a cooling rack for a few minutes, so basically the chocolate chips aren't molten hot when I go to do the taste test. Now this is the tastiest part of the whole video, but I'll be honest, I tried all 5 of the cookies, and I couldn't find a difference between them. They all tasted about the same to me, and I found the reason why was that the chocolate chips kind of overpowered any volatilities that may exist inside the cookie. So let me know down in the comments if you think there's a better cookie recipe that we could try, and I'll do that in a future video if anyone recommends a good one. All the cookies did turn out amazing, as who doesn't love a good chocolate chip cookie? They're probably not the prettiest thing looking on the internet, but I love chocolate chip cookies. So let's move on to the last taste test. Now, a few months back, I brewed a chocolate raspberry stout that I did add vanilla extract directly to the keg, but I want to see how adding different extracts would affect the flavor profile of that beer as it stands right now, as vanilla is a pretty common additive when it comes to craft beer. So for this experiment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add half a teaspoon of vanilla extract to 1 shot of beer, which is about 1.5 ounces, and I'll stir the beer and the extract together before doing a taste test. And from left to right, I have the store-bought, the vodka, the rum, the whiskey, and the bourbon. And I will tell you that they definitely did change for each of these beers. So let's get started with the store-bought brand. Now, this sample actually seemed to increase the artificial flavor that was kind of there as a subtle note. It almost tastes like this raspberry extract to a level of almost medicinal raspberry flavor, kind of like cough syrup. Not super pleasant, but it happens. Next up was a vodka extract, which had little effect on the actual stout flavor. If anything, I did find that it kind of suppressed some of the chocolate and raspberry flavor that was in the beer without adding the vanilla extract. The rum extract was actually the craziest one of all. It actually increased the perceived sweetness of the beer, as well as enhancing the chocolate character as well. I've never actually made a tincture using rum as a liquor, so maybe this will be something I can try in the future. Switching to the whiskey extract, it added a noticeable aroma that wasn't there in the previous 3. It also adds a flavor character that kind of reminds me of like a barrel character or a barrel-aged beer, which is pretty common because in barrel-aged beers you do get a vanillin character, which is the active ingredient vanilla, so maybe that's what I'm tasting in this case. The bourbon again did add a noticeable boozy character on the taste that actually lingers over time, but didn't really affect the chocolate nor the raspberry flavor in the stout that was there. So what does this all mean? I think based on this, if you want to make a vanilla bean tincture to add to a chocolate stout, I recommend using rum as the alcohol, as in my opinion, it was the best of all of these 5. For me, what it did was increase perceived sweetness and chocolate notes of the stout, but didn't make it taste artificial. Now, the last thing I had to try was mixing all 4 of these together, and that concoction actually kind of rounded out some of the flavors, and it did enhance the Tootsie Pop flavor that was there in the original base beer. Now, if you want to see how to make this beer for yourself, check out the video on the screen right now, and I hope to see you again soon.